We have three new pieces of information to get out today. One of them is going to be fairly technical. One of them is nothing short of terrifying, but the other one is something that had been predicted and has now come true. The outbreak of Ebola has vectored in four cardinal directions now from where it started, from where they allege it started, I guess. North up to the South Sudan border, west all the way to the border of the, I guess, regular Republic of the Congo versus the DRC. It has gone eastward into Uganda and southward now confirmed into Goma. It was said by the authorities over a month ago that if the disease was confirmed to get to Goma, it would go global. I think it's already been global, but now I don't think they're going to be able to keep a lid on it. And that's confirmed right here. This is the BBC. There's many others too. You can just look up Ebola, Goma, Goma, and you can find your confirmation for it. Now, here is part of the story that I hadn't covered before because I didn't want people flipping out. But I think it's time to reveal this. There is a thing called invisible Ebola. A week or two ago, there was this news conference put out by the medical director in San Antonio stating that they could guarantee the city is Ebola free because of the time the immigrants had been traveling and they hadn't seen any symptoms and all this kind of stuff. Well, you have to specifically test for Ebola to know if somebody has the antibodies. And they're not doing this, clearly. They're just looking for the symptoms that they believe are the symptoms, and when they don't see them, and then they use their histories, they say, well, no, the chances of them having Ebola are just really, really small. Well, this is from November 15th, 2016. This talks about 187 people that were exposed to Ebola. 14 of those 187 tested positive for Ebola antibodies, although 2 of the 4 admitted to having had a fever, the other 12 denied having had any symptoms at all. While these people may have simply not wanted to admit to having had symptoms because of stigma or fear, the researchers say the results may indicate that these individuals contracted Ebola with only mild or asymptomatic infection. This is the part of the story they don't want you to know. You might see somebody who just has a fever, the sniffles, and they might not even know they have Ebola. And it might not kill them. Some people are completely immune to it. In fact, that's the tie to the third piece of information. There has been this murder in Crete of a doctor. They found her in a cave. She had been suffocated. Now, while they're calling it just an unsolved homicide, there's more to the story. She wasn't just any doctor. She studied something called Drosophila. And Drosophila is basically fruit flies. Now, I'm sure many of you are asking, what do fruit flies have to do with Ebola? No, it doesn't have anything to do with the fruit bats, the reservoir, nothing to do with it. What it has to do with is her particular field of study was the reproduction of fruit flies, how they did it, what was good for it, what wasn't good for it, what affected it, both positively and negatively. And that's what she had studied for 25 years. There's a certain bacteria that live symbiotically inside fruit flies. And this particular bacteria lives with many other insects and animals. And without this bacteria, animals would go sterile. It's just part of the system. But this bacteria has another very interesting characteristic. It stops viral replication in its tracks. In fact, this study of what they call Wolbachia has been used to stop the spread of viruses of the West Nile, of dengue, norovirus, chikungunya, And this is what she was studying. She was studying how could we use this Wolbachia bacteria to stop the spread of viral diseases. And they had amazing results. In fact, here's an article talking about it. Ambitious experiment plans to release bacteria-bearing mosquitoes at large scale. Because that's what these bacteria do. They have some unique characteristic that if an animal or some organism is infected with a virus, this bacteria stops their replication. Researchers have used the bacteria known as Wolbachia in trials in places including Australia and Brazil in recent years, but those efforts were small, reaching areas with tens of thousands of residents. The new trials will cover urban areas with millions of people. The goal to see if the promising results from the early field trials can be replicated and possibly to demonstrate that the approach can halt viruses like Zika and yellow fever, but they're not mentioning, of course, here, and Ebola. This is what this woman was studying, doing, and they found her dead in a cave. Unexplained. So, clearly there is something afoot that is not normal with the spread of this disease, the spread of other diseases, the reporting of it. There's also an article out there that I forgot to bring the tab up on that talks about how the Japanese have now promised millions of dollars of military aid and assistance to Fiji. And I wish I would have brought up the tab. If you search Japan, Fiji, military aid, you'll find it. It's not a hard thing to find, even in Google, believe it or not. But just to cover this again, her study was fruit flies. Primarily, her study was the reproduction of fruit flies. One of the things necessary for fruit flies to reproduce and be healthy and do what fruit flies do is the presence of this bacteria called Wolbachia. And she was in the middle of a study that was going to introduce this Wolbachia into mosquitoes that could then spread it. And if they were infected with diseases like yellow fever or Zika or Ebola, those diseases wouldn't replicate in the mosquito to the point that they could be that infectious anymore. This is what she was studying. And they found her murdered. So, anyway, you put this alongside this story of invisible Ebola, and I think it paints a very clear picture of what's going on around the world. I'm not feeling the greatest. I don't think I have Ebola, but strange things have been happening. Sicknesses have just been cropping up in places where they shouldn't, in people that they shouldn't, and in large numbers. All sorts of different diseases. Or at least what's being described as different diseases. Because remember, you can't, first of all, there's no rule that says you can't have two diseases. That you get one and the one brings your immune system down so far that it causes you to be infected with another. Then you go to whatever, the med point or whatever. And if, let's say the first disease was Ebola, let's just devil's advocate there. Now, the only way you know if you have Ebola is if you specifically test for it. If you don't specifically test for it, you'll never know. So let's say that Ebola knocked down your immune system, and then you got something else, like dengue, or measles, or West Nile, or chikungunya. Now, at your normal hospital, definitely in North America, those are going to be the first things they try to rule out. They're not going to go right to the Ebola test. So when they find you infected with one thing or the other thing, they're just going to stop there. And that's why this is going to be a very, very complicated, diluted thing to report and to make people understand. Is that, yes, you may have those other things. Yes, you may have measles. Yes, you may have yellow fever. Yes, you may have dengue, but the reason you might have gotten it was because initially you were infected with this other thing. And this other thing isn't always like it is in the movies. Yes, some people it kills in 48 to 72 hours. Some people it takes 2 weeks for symptoms to even manifest. And in some people, those symptoms may manifest just as the sniffles and a cough and a headache and fever. And they can be spreading that, and it won't kill that person, but it might kill 100 others. That's the problem. And that's a hard thing to explain without sounding like you're crazy. But anyway, I will leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Take care, take precautions, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.